Hi, my name is Jeremy Hafner. I'm the president and head brewer of Ojai Valley Brewery. I founded Ojai Valley Brewery in 2015 and started producing beer here in 2017 with a very specific goal: to make beer specifically in the Ojai Valley with ingredients from the Ojai Valley. We'll be tasting a few beers today. The first is our flagship beer, White Pixie. It's a white wheat ale made with Pixie tangerine zest and blossoms from the trees in the orchards surrounding us all the time. And a lot of people ask me why it doesn't taste more like tangerine. And I tell them the beer's really more about the smell on the air in spring in Ojai. I'm really trying to recreate what the flowers are doing in the air in like April. So if you've been in the Ojai Valley in April, you know, it's just like this cacophony of citrus blossoms when you walk outside in the evenings, and that's what that beer's about. The second beer we'll be tasting is Sugar Bush. It is the closest thing I do to an IPA, except it's far less bitter. I take all of the hops and I put them in a cold infusion so none of the oils isomerize and become bitter. And then I secondarily infuse it with Sugar Bush sumac from out of the hills in Ojai. It's one of the many herbs that we wild forage for our beers at Ojai Valley Brewery. The combination of the sumac and the hops give a really subtle, interesting flavor that a lot of people really say you can't get anywhere else. The third beer that we'll be tasting is Arbolotta. It's named after a very famous neighborhood in Ojai, surrounded by oaks. And to pay homage to the oaks in the Arbolotta, we've added Mexican vanilla bean to this dry black lager to give you the vanillin of what you usually get out of oak and oak wood. And lastly, we'll be tasting Goat on a Leash, which is a tip of the hat to all my friends walking their goats on Ojai Day. It is a 7.5% combination lager, somewhere between a Hellsbach and a California Common, which we lovingly call craft malt liquor. So let's pour some beers. So first we'll be tasting White Pixie. This is our Belgian white ale made with Pixie tangerine zest and blossoms. It's a very soft, round sort of mouthfeel. We make it with raw oats and raw wheat as well. And we make it sort of for the absolute palest color we can get in it so that we're not overpowering all of the really soft, volatile florals and citrus flavors that we're trying to make pop in this. We also brew this extremely dry, so there's not like a residual sugary taste left in your mouth. Most of our beers are brewed dry, unlike a lot of breweries, because we're brewing specifically for the Ojai Valley, where a lot of the times it's just 110 degrees and you don't want to be drinking something syrupy. The first thing I smell on this is almost like an apple blossom type of thing, and I think it's a combination of the citrus and the citrus blossoms and a little bit of chamomile that we use in this. It makes it smell a little bit like apple blossom. That's really smooth. It's got this really round, silky mouthfeel to it from the oats, which lend a lot of oils and proteins to this, which is part of what makes this beer semi-hazy. And then we also carbonate this on the lower side so that it's not like a really tight, bright, stinging carbonation. It's more of a smooth sort of wine feel to it. Yeah, I mean, it's this beer out of all the beers I've ever made is the closest I've ever gotten to creating something that is greater than the sum of its parts. The way the spices and the citrus blossoms and the citrus zest and all this stuff come together to create a flavor that, I mean, it's the only thing I can compare it to is the smell of the citrus blossoms on the air in the evening in spring. And it's hard to stop drinking it. This is our #1 beer as far as subscriptions that we send to people outside of Ojai. This is the #1 beer that people buy when they're coming in to taste what Ojai is about. And obviously Pixie tangerines are a giant part of what Ojai agriculture is about. But most people don't get to experience what it's like to be in Ojai when all of those citrus blossoms are blooming, and it's just like, it's something I want to share with everybody. This next beer we'll be tasting is Sugar Bush. It's technically called an IPA, but it isn't what you would be able to compete if you were at a beer competition as an IPA, because it's just less bitter than most IPAs are. Most IPAs get their bitterness from boiling hops, and when you boil hops, the lupulin or alpha acids in them isomerizes and becomes bitter. Simultaneously, when that happens, the essential oils that give them all those like floral and fruity flavors get blown off in the steam, and you don't have those anymore. So for this beer, which I call an OPA, an Ojai Pale Ale, it's sort of like an IPA, except it's just a little less bitter than what you would usually get. Actually, a lot less bitter than what you're tasting from commercial IPAs today. And most of the hops go into the beer after the brewing process. They go in cold after the fermentation has taken place, so all of the essential oils get pushed into the beer and not boiled and turned bitter. I also brew this beer dry. A lot of California IPAs that you'll drink around here are very sweet and cloying, and they have a tendency to overpower your mouth. Along with the bitterness, they also sort of leave this like sweet thing on the back of your mouth, which this beer does not, because it's built for hot weather. Along with the hops and the dry profile, I also add Sugar Bush sumac, which is one of 2 sumac varieties that we have growing all over the place here in Ojai. Sugar Bush sumac and lemonade berry is the other one that everybody talks about. Is something that all the way back to the Chumash and up into modern day Ojai residents, they use these wild forage berries smashed together with sugar and water to make lemonade. Essentially, the sumac tastes a lot like lemon. If you've ever eaten Persian food, you've definitely had sumac on top of that. It's like this very pungent, sort of acidic flavor to it that's very reminiscent of lemon. The interesting thing about the sumac is, and I didn't realize it until after we had brewed this, the combination of the oils in the hops along with the flavors of the sumac give it this crazy aftertaste that I can only sort of describe as apricot. It's a lot like apricot, and it's just in the very back end, in the back of my palate when I taste it. And maybe it's because there isn't so much residual sugar that I taste that, but it's something that I've heard many people who drink this beer and who buy this beer regularly tell me, is that there's this apricot thing in the background. They're wondering where it comes from. And I think it's just the fact that, the human mouth only tastes so many things. And when you just start mashing things up, you create flavors that we recognize as something, but that aren't necessarily there. It's why so many people can pull different things out of wine. This beer also only uses hops from the United States. Most IPAs today are using hops exclusively from New Zealand. I personally feel that it's completely unsustainable to be flying hops for my beer almost all the way around the world in order to use them. We don't do a lot of hop forward beers because hops just don't grow in California. Out of the entirety of the state of California, there's like 75 total acres of hops growing here. Just to give you an idea, there's like 4 million acres of wheat growing here. But for this one beer, we buy our hops from a place in Washington so that it's as close as we could possibly get it, but also so it's got some sort of feel for the West Coast and those flavors. The head was pretty long lasting on this. It's gone down as I drank it, but for the amount of sugar that's not there, it's pretty decent. Once again, this is another beer that we do not overcarbonate. I feel that a lot of beers are completely overcarbonated these days, and I want to taste what's in it, not just have my mouth blown out by it. This beer is available to purchase from our tap room and online, and this is our most popular beer for sales in the tap room. The next beer we're drinking is Arbolotta. It is one of my absolute favorites, and it's not just because of the things that we put in it, it's because lager is one of my favorite topics and one of my favorite things to get into with beer. The fun thing about lager is because the fermentations are so clean and because the beers are so simple, you really can't hide the errors that you made in the beer. Just to give you an example, if I made an ale and something happened with it where there was some sort of off flavor with diacetyl tasting like a butter or like something like that, I could literally throw 20 pounds of hops on top of it, call it an IPA, and you probably wouldn't know the difference. With these lagers, there's just nowhere to hide. So if you make a bad beer, everybody's gonna know it. This beer in particular was a labor of love. I wanted to create a dark black beer that you could drink when it was 120 degrees outside. Specifically because, usually in the middle of summer, we're just not drinking black beers. And there specifically was a German beer style that until recently just wasn't that popular in the United States called Schwarzbier, which means black beer. And actually, since I started making this, 2 or 3 other local breweries have started making black lagers as well. We make this super dry, so there's no real sugar residuals to it. So it's very good for hot weather drinking, but it also has a clean, sort of creamy feel to it, which is brought to it by the addition of whole Mexican vanilla beans. The Mexican vanilla beans are something that I usually source when I'm down in the Oaxaca area. There's a lot of farms out there growing this kind of stuff, and we usually bring it back from when we're there. I like it because it's a continental America's ingredient, but also because although vanilla has the reputation for being, or the connotation for being bland, vanilla is actually one of the most complex floral flavors on the planet. It's something that you just can't replicate, and when you taste it, you always know exactly what it is. Also, interestingly enough, these vanilla beans right now they cost more than sterling silver does by the ounce. It's a fun product to play with. I'm super lucky to get to be able to play with it, and it makes something so super unique and so super Ojai and California and Mexico and all that combination of like where we come from. I just love it. This beer is an incredible leap of faith for me when I brew it. It's got these really great like cocoa and coffee undertones, but without the sweetness. But when we brew it, until we bring it down below like 40 to 39 degrees, you can't taste any of that coffee and chocolate malt stuff. It just tastes like water, honestly. And then you bring it down to a certain temperature and all of these malt flavors just sort of blossom. I would strongly recommend drinking this beer as cold as possible. This beer is just great year round. It's a perfect fall beer too. It pairs really nicely with all sorts of like fall squashy, meaty stews. And the vanilla, it's not in a desserty way. It's just like, it's really just in the background of that coffee and chocolate flavor. Most of the things that I brew with, I'm never trying to beat you over the head with it. It's about subtlety and nuance. A lot of beers right now, when you drink them, it's like they're just beating your mouth to death with things, but I really want you to be able to enjoy these beers with food and for it to contribute to the overall experience. So this beer will definitely not get in the way of whatever you're eating. I feel like Julia Childs, like, am I just gonna fall over at some point here? Last but not least, probably my favorite beer right now is Goat on a Leash. And it is a lager that is a hybrid combination of two very interesting kinds of lager. One of them is a Hellsbock, which is sort of a lighter, high gravity beer from Germany. And the other is the California Common. California Common Lager is a very, very specific type of beer. The yeast that you use for California Common was actually genetically pressured and originated at Anchor Brewery, Anchor Steam Beer up in San Francisco, and it's a lager yeast that over years of genetic pressuring has been made so that it can ferment at slightly warmer temperatures than most lager yeasts do. Unlike ale yeast, lager yeast usually ferment at somewhere in the mid 50s to the high 50s, but never up into the 60s and 70s like most ales do. And the lower temperature leads to very clean fermentations. Hellsbocks are generally sort of a higher gravity, maltier beer that's made for spring and fall in Germany for celebrating. And the California Common beer is a little bit darker, but it's more hop forward. So what I did with this beer is I took the body and the alcohol content or gravity of a Hellsbock, and I mashed that up with the yeast strain for the Cali Common, as well as the sort of hop forward nature of it. And what you get is a pale fall and spring celebration lager that comes in at just about 7.5% alcohol, which if you're not careful will catch up with you because you can't really taste the alcohol in it. It's got a very malty, bready sort of background to it, almost like a great San Francisco sourdough, but without the sour finish on it. And the combination of it's slightly sweeter because of it's a medium body beer, but the combination of that with the mosaic hops being very hop forward, it's just a really delicious lager. It doesn't fit anywhere into competition guidelines for beer. If I sent this to a competition, they'd tell me it doesn't fit into any style guideline. You can't compete that beer, which is actually the case with most of the beers I make because I don't follow style guidelines. I feel like style guidelines are like playing cover songs, and I've just never been into playing covers. This beer has a little bit more carbonation on it to compensate for the amount of body that we put into it. And it's really built for these fall and spring sort of very, the change of season from warm to cold, these celebrations that we have. I can't say enough good things about this beer. It's my favorite lager that I've ever made. And once again, it is Goat on a Leash for all of the people walking their goats around on leashes in Ojai, which I find fantastic. Cheers.